Hello friends, and welcome back to another video. So I thought I would do another one of these like I took a course and now I'm sharing my insights with you kind of videos. Yesterday morning I spent it's a 4-hour course. It was another Readsy course from like 10 to 2. I spent some time taking some notes for the 4 different sessions that they had. They had authors, like published authors. They had literary agents. This mess behind me is my book in visual form. So I'm writing a dark academic adult fantasy called Project Souls. It has a real name. That's sort of the code name for now, that I hope to traditionally publish. I'm very, very close to finishing. I literally just hit 110,000 words. I'm in the climax. It's very exciting. There's a lot of stuff going down. All of my little chapter summaries are on these index cards. It's like a reverse outlining thing. We'll get to it. This video is essentially a giant overview of everything that I learned. So I'm kind of giving you insights into what the actual professionals say about revising your work. I do hope to traditionally publish this. I'm going to start the query process, hopefully, fingers crossed, later this year, like in the fall. Without further ado, let's get into it. First up, the first session was all about draft 0. This is basically like the first draft, but people will call it draft 0. I immediately was like, ooh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get anything out of this, because draft 0 is essentially where you are just vomiting onto the page. This session was with Rebecca Heyman, who has been a freelance editor for many years, and she recently joined the publishing team at Entangled. She works in acquisitions, by the way, at Entangled. So she is literally one of the people deciding whether or not your book gets published. I remember she was on one of the panels last time in the previous Readsy course that I attended, and she's definitely one of those people who will tell it to you straight. She is not beating around the bush. She was answering questions quickly. She got to the point. I really appreciated her honesty because I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to your writing, it's very precious to you, and so a lot of people don't, you know, it's like everybody's kind of treading lightly because they don't want to hurt your feelings, and she was very straightforward and to the point, which I very much appreciated. So she talked about 4 main things. How a draft 0 should reveal the structure, meaning you are not writing all the beautiful flowery metaphors right now. Draft 0 is literally just you kind of like framing the house. Like, can you see the outline of it? You're exploring your voice or the voice of the character. Do they have any like vocal tics? Are there any things that you're basically discovering who the main character is. It also should be reflective of your style, meaning like don't judge yourself too harshly on the way that you're writing. You are just kind of like discovering your writing style or the style that is appropriate for the book. And then the 4th point that she gave was it's just existing. Like the whole point of a draft 0 is just to help the story exist, just to get it on the page. She said it's, but it's like a tattoo in a sensitive place, meaning you shouldn't show it to anyone. So your draft 0 is literally you vomiting up the story onto the page. I don't do this. I don't draft 0. I do a first proper draft. It's taken me about a year to do this draft because I really take my time and I'm kind of editing as I go. But I end up with something super solid that I'm very proud of, even though it's literally just the first draft. And then she did give an editing action plan. She gave 5, kind of 6, mainly 5 tips for when you go in to do your revisions. Number 1 was do nothing. Do absolutely nothing. She said you need to take a break. She recommends 30 days. You need to celebrate the fact that you finished the whole thing. You need to potentially start another manuscript. Second, identify your landmarks. Now, at first I was like, I had no idea what she was talking about. Luckily, she had a presentation that she had prepared, so there were some visuals. And what she means by this was you need to be able to identify your beginning. What's the inciting incident? There has to be one particular scene that starts the whole thing off. You need to know, okay, what is generally happening in the middle? What's the end? Where does it end? What's the sort of dark night of the soul or darkest moment that your reader or that your main character experiences? What's the emotional climax? Is there a healing of an inner wound? Like some sort of trauma that the character is healing from? The resolution of the external conflict. So she was like saying, make a note of those, make sure you know what they are. Number 3 was engineer and reverse engineer your synopsis. So basically she broke this down to mean it should be a 1 to 2 page, single-spaced outline of the entire book. So that's essentially what I've done here. So these are my chapter summaries. I'm not gonna have to reverse engineer it because I've been doing it as I go. If you haven't done that, which I have drafted books before, so I know that this kind of thing is very helpful, but if you haven't been doing that, you are gonna have to go back through at some point and read the entire book, or at least skim it, and then write down a chapter by chapter outline, because some literary agents are going to want a 1 to 2 single spaced page of the entire synopsis. Number 4 was identify your reader. So basically just like make sure you know who you're writing for. If you think that you are writing a YA, like that's what you've told yourself that you're writing, but actually, you know, like the themes and the things and the actual language that you're using is very adult and very mature, then maybe you're not actually writing a young adult. So she's just kind of saying like, check yourself, make sure you are actually writing for who you think you're writing for. This is also the part where she kind of talks about becoming aware of the market a little bit. Like, try to read in your genre. She was like, I know writers will say I can't read in my genre while I'm writing it. That would be like me not being able to read a dark academic book because I'm writing a dark academic book. That doesn't bother me, but she said you still need to know. Like, you still need to know what's trending in the market in your genre. And then number 5 was follow desire. So this meant the protagonist, their proximity to the conflict has to change in every chapter. Now, this is like a hyper specific piece of advice that she's giving. Your story's not really going anywhere if the conflict isn't morphing or changing a little bit in every single chapter. So I think this is probably true. Like, if you think of a book that you read that you felt like it was so slow, it was so boring, like nothing was really happening, it's probably because the conflict, like the character's proximity to the conflict, it wasn't changing as the story progressed. So that's my interpretation. If you guys think she meant something different, let me know. But that's kind of what I got from it. Oh, and then her last thing was just kind of like detach. Like, that was kind of her last bit of advice. Detach from it. Don't feel precious about it. She literally said your draft 0 is going to be dog. Like, that is the actual word that she used. She was like, it's gonna be dog. So just get comfortable with it being dog. And then the second session of the day was revision the structural way, with Caroline Leavitt. She's an author. Wasn't anything that I'd heard of or read, but they do sound interesting. It sounds kind of like sort of just like family drama, slice of life kind of stories. And she gave a whole slew of just like, she was really just like kind of throwing darts at us with all of the bits of advice and the things that she does when she's revising a book. So her first thing was read it out loud. Like, read the entire novel out loud. So whenever you've given it a bit of a rest and you're ready to go back into it, actually read it out loud. Like, not just the dialogue. I always read my dialogue out loud. Usually as I'm writing it, I'll kind of mumble it to myself just to make sure it sounds fine. But she said the quickest way to pick up on anything that sounds a little off or weird, or, you know, any writing that's kind of not great, it is literally going to be difficult for you to read, and you're going to stumble over it as you read. Print the manuscript in a different font and or color than what you wrote it in. I feel like I've heard people say this before. I don't know. It's interesting. She said it tricks your brain into thinking that it's something new and something different that you haven't read before, which could also help you potentially detach from it. That could be potentially really expensive to print it in color. Something else I've seen some other readers or other writers mention before is writing things out on Post-it notes. I think what she was referring to was essentially this, what I've done with the index cards, but she just held up a Post-it note and said write like every scene on a Post-it note, and then you can kind of track the flow of it, like if you're putting them up on your wall. I think index cards is actually a lot better because you can fit so much more on them. Like, if you're gonna write out the chapter, I just feel like also the fact that like you can get them with lines on it, I think is so much better. So she said Post-it notes. I recommend index cards for sure. Then she mentioned your beta readers. They should not be your family or your friends. With my first novel, I definitely reached out to family and friends. She said the problem with this is that because people know you and they love you and they don't want to hurt your feelings, they're going to be like, oh, it's so great. Yeah, awesome. And they're not actually going to give you any really good feedback. Have your beta readers be somebody else. I think there's a website called like Critique Match. Somebody mentioned it in the comments. Also, she mentioned that if you're reading through the draft and you're like, oh, this kind of like nothing's really happening, like you feel like it's not really great. If things are bad, make them worse. She was calling this something negation, but essentially like just make things worse. If they're already bad, make them worse. And it's going to be so much more interesting for your reader. Also, she mentioned cutting description and dialogue. So whenever you go through your second draft, it shouldn't be getting longer, it should be getting shorter, because you should be trimming back and paring back as much description and dialogue as you possibly can. I think there's a big caveat here with like depending on what genre and type of book that you're writing. Obviously, if I'm reading like literary fiction, I am gonna expect some good writing and some good description. Then the third session was how I finished my novel, and this was an author panel with 3 traditionally published authors. I believe they were traditionally published. We had Beth Morgan, who wrote A Touch of Jen, which I may or may not have DNF'd, but I think I maybe DNF'd it too early. You guys can let me know, because I've heard I generally have heard some mixed reviews. I could not stand the characters. They were insufferable. Gina Chung, who I'm so excited. I want to read her books sound really cool. So she has a fiction book called Sea Change that has something to do with an octopus. It sounds interesting. And then I actually really want to read her short story collection called Green Frog. It sounds more like speculative, which is right up my street. So Green Frog is now on my TBR. And then also Kirthana Ramisetti. I think they were saying Kirthana. She wrote the Dava Sastry book. I forget the title. She's got a few, actually. There's several. And she does like family drama, generational saga type stories. And so she was there as well. So it was the 3 of them. Some things that they all mentioned, that they all do, that they all had in common: they rest after they draft. Gina Chung mentioned, similarly to what Caroline Leavitt had said about printing it in a different color, she actually put her manuscript, she downloaded it onto her Kindle and then was able to change the font on her Kindle. And so when she was reading it through, it felt like a different book. And so it allows you that like detachment and that distance from it, which I thought was quite clever. I don't have a Kindle, and I do prefer like physical editing, but that might be an option for you if you have a Kindle. So then the specifics. So the specific advice from Gina Chung was when she was talking about like writing about more dark, like emotional topics, she said it is okay for it to feel cringy like as you're writing it, but be vulnerable. Like, do not be afraid to maybe take it even a little too far or to feel like it's a little bit TMI. You can always change it later. But vulnerability is a big thing with your characters because it makes them more human and it makes them feel less like a character in a book and more like you're writing about a real person. Then Kirthana Ramisetti mentioned, she was asked about tracking revisions. And so she said she has an entire character spreadsheet where she breaks everything down. All the things that she specifically wants to track, she has a spreadsheet to do it. I haven't had to go there yet, and I'm kind of hoping that I don't. She tracks the chronology of events, and then when she's revising a specific scene, she puts that scene, she will copy and paste that specific scene into a separate document so that it's not overwhelming and she's not trying to like work with the entire manuscript. Beth Morgan talked about how she will actually create a completely new, fresh document when she goes to make a new draft. So like draft 2 is a completely new, fresh document, and she starts from the beginning. So she's essentially rewriting the entire book with each new draft, and she said she did that about 10 times. So she essentially said the previous draft becomes like an outline for the new draft. And then so many questions were in the chat, so many people asking about, when do you know you're done? Like, when do you know the drafting process is done? How do you know if you need 3 drafts or 5 drafts or 17 drafts or whatever? That was a big question. And the authors and some of the agents all basically said the same thing. Everybody said when you have completely exhausted yourself with the story. You cannot make any more changes. There's no way for you to make it any better. There is not a single thing that you can find in the story and make it a little bit better. So once you are like tapped out of ideas, then you're done. And then the final session of the day was called Revision Tips, Applying Professional Feedback. This was with Sarah LaPolla. She's a full-time writer and an editor at Reedsy, so you can like hire her for like developmental edits for your story. Her presentation was all about Band-Aid self-editing tips. So these are like things that she sees a lot of times in the manuscripts that she is helping people edit. The first Band-Aid tip was conjunctions. She said conjunctions can create emphasis, but don't overuse them. So these are words like but, or, and, using them at the start of a sentence. She said she sees that a lot. It's super common. It doesn't give necessarily your prose the sense of like quality. You can use them for emphasis. If you all of a sudden start like you have a whole paragraph and then you just have one sentence that's off by itself and it starts with but, or and, or whatever, because you are putting emphasis on that line, totally fine, but don't do it with all your sentences. And then she mentioned doing a redundancy check. A redundancy check is basically hitting like Control F in your document and searching for words that you know are like your crutch words. She mentioned her crutch word is just, and girl, same. Also the word that. A lot of times you don't need the word that at all. It does not change the meaning of the sentence, the flow of the sentence, the sound of the sentence, just take it out. Make sure you're using active voice throughout. I'm really bad about slipping into passive voice. This is something that I'm like maybe half the time I'm good about checking myself for and switching from passive to active. Also, she mentioned when you get feedback, don't think of the feedback as like this is good or this is bad. So like don't judge the feedback, don't judge the writing. Think of it just in terms of this works or this doesn't work. And I think that's a really powerful piece of advice, because so often we can take things to heart and we can take things really personally with our writing, and it kind of turns it into a little bit more of a neutral thing and then allows you to, again, have that detachment that everybody's been talking about. She mentioned how your characters should be moving, and she said, yes, physically moving, like they should be getting up and around and moving and doing things and literally moving through the story, but also emotionally. There should be things happening to them that cause them to feel a myriad of emotions. Otherwise, they're going to feel like a cardboard cutout. And I know I have read books like this. Here's maybe like not the best example. This just happens to be the book that I'm reading right now, A Passage North. This is a book where he is physically on a train, so his body is physically moving, he's traveling, but he is also going back in his mind and having flashbacks, and so he's experiencing all these emotions. So the character is moving physically, but he's also moving emotionally through the story. Then she said, don't neglect your side characters. Just because they are not your protagonist does not mean that they should also like not be a well-rounded human. And they need to be fleshed out and have their own tics and their own hobbies, and you can almost write them the same way that you would your protagonist. They're just probably not getting as much page time. She went on a whole rant about show don't tell. I don't know if you guys had any sort of, if you've been to any like creative writing workshops or you've done any other courses or something, but show don't tell is like such a repeated thing that comes up so often, which basically just means like don't say, oh, he was angry. You show like the clenched fist, right? That's basically show don't tell. And she said there are caveats to this. During certain times of your novel, like maybe during the exposition, when you're doing like world building and that kind of thing, you can, within the first couple of chapters, do a lot of telling. It doesn't have to be an info dump, but you can for sure be a little bit telly within those first 3 chapters. Then you should switch back to a little bit more show don't tell as the chapters go on. Same thing with like backstory. She was talking about how there should be absolutely no backstory in your first chapter. It should all just be in the moment, whatever the scene is happening, whatever the inciting incident is, and then you can sprinkle it throughout. I was happy to hear that because that's what I've done with Project Souls. Then also she mentioned pacing, which is a big one. She said, too much dialogue or too much action is gonna make the pace feel really wonky, so you want a balance between them. Also, literally just varying your sentence structure. So literally with the prose, you can change the pacing. And all of that, she said, will keep the reader engaged. If you can balance out your pacing, then you will keep your reader engaged pretty much the whole time. And that is everything. Those are all the notes that I took. I hope that was helpful. You guys let me know if you're drafting anything. What draft are you in? Do you have any other tips that I didn't mention here that you think could be quite helpful to people? I would love to know any other little bits of advice that you have. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.